Chapter 1. The Soviet Atomic Dream. The story of Chernobyl doesn't begin with a roar of fire, but with the silent, towering ambition of the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War. In the 1970s, nuclear power wasn't just an energy source, it was the peaceful atom, the ultimate proof of communist engineering superiority. To showcase this power, they built the Lenin Nuclear Power Plant in the heart of northern Ukraine. But a power plant needs workers, and workers need a home. Thus, the city of Pripyat was born, a model city of the future. It featured wide boulevards, Olympic-sized swimming pools, and a brand-new amusement park with a yellow Ferris wheel that was set to open just days after the disaster. For the 50,000 residents, life was good. They were the elite of the working class, living in a forest-surrounded paradise, blissfully unaware that they were sleeping next to a technological titan that was fundamentally broken. Chapter 2. A masterpiece of flawed engineering. The heart of the plant was the RBMK-1000 reactor, a masterpiece of Soviet thrift and scale. It was massive, using graphite blocks to sustain a nuclear chain reaction and water to cool it down. It was designed to be cheap to build and easy to maintain, but it possessed a secret, state-guarded weakness known as a positive void coefficient. In simple terms, if the cooling water turned to steam, the reactor didn't slow down, it sped up. Even more terrifying was the scram system. To stop the reaction, 211 boron control rods were designed to drop into the core. However, in a fatal design flaw, the tips of these rods were made of graphite. This meant that for the first few seconds of an emergency shutdown, the rods would actually increase the reaction before stopping it. It was a fatal contradiction. The very button meant to save the plant acted for one heartbeat as a detonator. Chapter 3. The Fatal Test. On April 25, 1986, Reactor 4 was scheduled to be shut down for routine maintenance. Leadership decided to use this window for a safety test that had already failed 3 times before. They wanted to see if the spinning turbines could still power the cooling pumps during a blackout for just 45 seconds until the diesel generators kicked in. The test was supposed to take place during the day, under the supervision of a highly experienced team who had prepared for weeks. But a sudden demand for electricity from the regional power grid forced a 10-hour delay. The Soviet authorities refused to let the plant lower its output during the day. As a result, the experienced day shift eventually went home, and the responsibility for this complex and dangerous experiment fell onto the shoulders of the night shift, a crew that had never been briefed on the test and was never meant to perform it. Chapter 4. The Pressure of the Night Shift. By the time the test finally began at midnight, the atmosphere in the control room of Reactor 4 was thick with tension. Anatoly Dyatlov, the deputy chief engineer, was a man known for his iron will and terrifying temper. He was determined to complete the test to stay on schedule, regardless of the delays or the lack of preparation. Under his command were 2 young operators, Alexander Akimov and Leonid Toptunov. Toptunov was only 25 years old and had been on the job for only a few months. As they began to lower the power, the reactor became incredibly difficult to control. It was like trying to balance a needle on its tip. When the power plummeted too low, the reactor became poisoned by xenon gas, a byproduct that acts like a sponge, soaking up the reactivity. To any trained eye, the reactor was stalling, and the only safe option was to shut it down. Chapter 5. Taming the Stall. Standard safety protocols were crystal clear. If the reactor power dropped this low, the test should be aborted immediately and the reactor shut down for 24 hours to let the xenon gas dissipate. But Dyatlov refused to listen. He feared the political fallout of a failed test and bullied the young, inexperienced operators into raising the power back up at any cost. To overcome the xenon pit, they were forced to take a desperate and illegal step. They pulled almost every single control rod out of the core. Out of the 211 rods that acted as the reactor's brakes, only about 18 remained inside. The computer system warned them that the reactor was no longer stable, but the crew disabled the automatic shutdown signals to keep the experiment running. The reactor was now a runaway train, with no brakes, but Dyatlov insisted they proceed with the test anyway. Chapter 6. The Point of No Return. At 1:23:04 a.m., the actual test began. The operators closed the valves to the turbines, cutting off the steam supply to see if the momentum of the spinning blades could keep the water pumps running. This was the moment of truth. However, as the pumps slowed down, the flow of cooling water decreased. Inside the core, the remaining water began to boil violently, turning into steam bubbles, or voids. Because of the RBMK's fatal design flaw, these steam bubbles caused the nuclear reaction to skyrocket. More heat created more steam, and more steam created more heat. In less than 30 seconds, the power of the reactor began to climb uncontrollably. The men in the control room watched in horror as the heavy 350-kilogram caps on the fuel channels began to dance and jump in their sockets. The peaceful atom was rapidly turning into a massive, pressurized bomb. Chapter 7. The AZ-5 Button. Sensing that the situation had spiraled out of control, Alexander Akimov finally reached for the emergency button, AZ-5. This was the scram switch, the ultimate failsafe designed to drop all 211 control rods into the core at once to kill the reaction. But as the rods began their slow, 5-second descent, the graphite tips entered the core first. For a fraction of a second, instead of stopping the reaction, they displaced the water and accelerated it. The power surged to over 100 times the reactor's maximum capacity. The heat became so intense that the fuel rods shattered instantly, and the control rod channels warped and melted, jamming the rods just 1/3 of the way down. The reactor was now locked in a terminal state. At 1:23:45 a.m., a massive steam explosion blew the 1,000-ton concrete upper shield right through the roof of the building, followed by a second, even more violent explosion that tore the core wide open. Chapter 8. The Invisible Inferno. The explosion launched chunks of burning radioactive graphite and fuel onto the roof of the neighboring turbine hall, starting dozens of fires. From the outside, it looked like a volcanic eruption of blue and red light, the result of the air itself being ionized by the extreme radiation. The first firefighters arrived within minutes, led by 23-year-old Lieutenant Vladimir Pravik. They had no idea they were walking over a literal exposed nuclear core. They wore only their standard canvas uniforms, which offered zero protection against radiation. They described a strange metallic taste in their mouths and a tingling sensation on their skin. As they fought the flames on the roof, they were being hit by lethal doses of radiation every minute. Within hours, these men began to collapse, their skin turned black, and their internal organs began to fail. They were the first of many who would give their lives to prevent the fire from spreading to the other three reactors. Chapter 9. The Price of Silence. For 36 hours, the Soviet government attempted to hide the truth from the world and even its own people. While the reactor was spewing a massive plume of radioactive dust across Europe, the people of Pripyat went about their Saturday as if nothing had happened. Children played in the black rain that fell from the clouds, and families watched the glowing fire from their balconies, unaware that every breath was bringing them closer to death. It wasn't until a nuclear plant in Sweden detected high radiation levels that the Kremlin finally admitted there was an accident. Only then did the evacuation of Pripyat begin. Residents were told they would be gone for only 3 days, so they left behind their pets, their family photos, and their entire lives. They were loaded onto 1,200 buses and driven away, never to see their homes again. The city of the future had become a city of the dead. Chapter 10. The Legacy. Today, Chernobyl is a 30-kilometer exclusion zone. A massive steel arch now covers the ruin to contain the radiation for the next century. It remains a haunting reminder that human arrogance and flawed technology can leave a scar on the Earth that lasts forever.